Here I am again reviewing Taylor Swift in the year 2020. Of course, back in July, it was only just July that she dropped Folklore, right at the end of July. It was a smash hit for Taylor, huge, got a Grammy nominations, got her huge success. People pretty much took to the change of pace that she delivered with that one pretty much instantaneously. It wasn't like, oh man, she's changed styles, I can't get with this, I need her to deliver more pop songs. Nah, people were pretty much on board with Folklore from the get-go, especially Taylor Swift fans, the core fan base. Some would even say it's her best album, one of the best albums of this year. I personally wouldn't go that far with either of those claims, but I totally respect it if you think that. For Folklore, not here to knock your opinion at all. And here we have Evermore. Evermore, the surprise release once again from Taylor Swift in 2020, the sister album, as she has labeled it, the sister album to Folklore. We have Evermore. Now, one thing you can dismissively say about sister albums, you could dismissively say, is that, they were all made in the same lab, they were all made with the same idea in mind. One album is the full album, the sister album is actually just leftovers. It can be the case, it definitely can be the case, but I think sometimes people throw that around a bit too easily, and I do think maybe Evermore isn't quite like that. But what I will say with Evermore is that to an extent it feels like the tracks aren't quite as brimming with the beauty that some of the tracks on Folklore had. So no, I won't be going as far as saying they're leftover tracks, but what I will say is that many of these tracks just don't quite have a pop to them, don't quite have a distinctness to them, and it really makes Evermore slightly more of a sluggish listen than Folklore was. And I don't know, I just don't see myself returning to many of these tracks on this album, unfortunately, which is a huge shame because I do want to say I do like Taylor Swift, and I just think this album here isn't hitting as much as I'd like it to. Now, to start off, we have possibly the best track here, or if not one of the best tracks here. It's easily one of the highlights on the album, Willow. I think this track is really good. It is really good. It has a bit of a country twang to it with the guitar. It's not quite as folky as what Folklore was. There is like I say, that country twang, something maybe Casey Musgraves would pull out the bag. There's some pretty potent lyrics on this track too, nothing too amazing or, out of this world, but I do think the line, life was a willow and it bent right to your wind, is a pretty potent lyric. And then I do like the line later on that she says, the more you say, the less I know. Probably a cliche thing to say, the more someone says, the less you know. But I think the way she delivers it is pretty strong. And the delivery across many of these tracks is really strong, to be fair. I think she obviously has a great voice. She has a lot of heart to her voice too. So when she delivers these slower, softer type tracks, it really lends itself nicely to the vocal performances that she gives. Willow is incredibly warm, cozy and inviting, and it just really kicks off the album in a really nice way, and it leads up to a pretty strong run, I think, of the first 5 tracks, which I think are honestly easily the best tracks here. Champagne Problems is very low-key actually, with its almost Regina Spektor-like piano lead, something you would hear on some of her earlier stuff like Songs, for example, just very reminiscent of that. The performances are really tight, the track itself is just really lovely. It's not the most amazing thing you'll ever hear, but I think what it's going for is pretty damn nice and not much I can argue with, really. Gold Rush has this rush of beauty with the instrumental. My god, the part where it kind of like enters the chorus, just like the whirlwind of like instrumentation that swells. It's a beautiful moment, and the track itself just sounds like it's produced in such a divine way. Honestly, it's very, very classy, it really does feel like upper class. 'Tis a Damn Season, probably one of the weaker tracks of this first 5-track run, but still the guitar tone in this one is lovely as hell, and it's just one of those things where it makes you feel like the album is leading to something truly great. But I would say once you get to Tolerate It, which is again another great track, after that I think I'm just starting to lose a bit of interest, it gets a bit shaky, some of the tracks just don't hit as hard. Tolerate It having one of the best lyrical ideas on the whole thing. I love the idea of, you know, telling someone that they're here to only tolerate it, but they're not willing to celebrate who you are, they're just tolerating it. And my God, if that's just not not the epitome of so many relationships I've encountered, not personally, but just generally seeing people in and out of relationships, and clearly there isn't, you know, a fit there. They're clearly not willing to accept the other person's flaws. They stay together. It ends really messy, you know, just as relationships often do when you break up with someone. And it's just so easy to see from the outside, but from the inside, you're not always as willing to accept it. So at the time, you're just like, yeah, it's going great. It's all fine. They're amazing. They're so great to me. But then afterwards, you're like, oh, wait, no, they were just tolerating all of my flaws, and they weren't actually willing to give me a chance and accept me for who I am. And from the opposite side, though, we often aren't willing to change our flaws, really. I mean, sometimes we have flaws that are worth working on and worth fixing and worth changing, but we're generally stubborn individuals that never change anything about ourselves. So yeah, I think the song is incredibly poignant and definitely one of the best lyrical moments on this album, not only just here, but on Folklore as well. If you piled all the tracks together, this would still be one of the best lyrical tracks out of both albums. Then we hit Nobody No Crime. This is where the stylistic change becomes a bit apparent. I mean, this track has a bit more of a rockier edge to it. It feels like an outlaw country type track with that kind of like rockiness, the kind of dirtiness, something you'd get in like the 60s or 70s from the classic country era. Taylor's delivery has a bit more of a gruffness to it as well. And then of course the theme of the song, which really lends itself really nicely to the outlaw country aesthetic, which is about a murder, I think. Is it a murder, or is it like a metaphor for a relationship falling apart? I don't really know. The lyrics get a bit confusing, I think. The track features Haim, by the way, who I expected to have a bit more of an, you know, a vocal presence on this one, but they don't really at all. They just do a bit of backing vocals. I assume they're the one taking charge of the tracks, you know, guitar, drums, everything else, bass, but as vocalists, I think they deserved a bit more of a shine here. Regardless though, I don't know, I thought a track like this would interest me lyrically because it kind of is quite different for what the rest of the album offers, but it just sticks out like a sore thumb. Like when you hit this track going from Tolerate It to this, like the transition is so jarring. Like why would you go from one of the slowest, softest songs on the whole thing to then hit this? It just felt like something that she wanted to do, because obviously Haim and Taylor Swift are really good friends in real life. They often are, you know, shown on social media together in photos and stuff like that. So it almost felt like, oh no, I want Haim on a song, so we're just going to do it anyway, regardless of whether it fits the album's theme, aesthetic, overall sound or not. And on the other end of the spectrum with features on this album, you get the National, which feature later on Coney Island. And the National is a great fit for this vibe, this sound. But the track itself, I just find really boring. I know it's a bit of a cliche word to say, and I maybe should have used a better descriptive word, but god damn, this track just does not entertain me in the slightest. It barely has a pulse to it. Like, god damn, just wake me up with something interesting, please, because this track does not have anything worth my time at all. It just like needs a push. It's like a kid on a slide who's too scared to slide down to the bottom. Just give him a little push and he'll be on his way. Happiness is another moment for me where the track is just not impactful at all. The instrumental here is really, really plain. Like, it's an incredibly plain sounding song, and it just needs to build to something more interesting. And the lyrics here as well, I just think are too on the nose with the whole idea of happiness and stuff like that. You needed me to be happy, now without me you're not gonna be happy, all that kind of shit. Heard it all before a million times. Not really that interesting on a lyrical level. I think the idea of 7 years in heaven is a pretty clever line. My friend actually was the one that pointed that out, because obviously the very American term, I guess you could call it 7 minutes in heaven. You know what that means. Not something you say over here, but it's a very Americanized term. Of course, 7 years in heaven. Well, yeah, you get it. At least we do have tracks like Dorothea and Ivy though. Dorothea has this really chirpy piano lead. This is definitely one of the best moments on the album for the piano instrumental itself. Piano does show up quite a few times on this album, by the way, but I think Dorothea is one of the highlights for this type of track that's on this album. And it's a track like this that makes me happy that Taylor is willing to go just all the way with these kinds of tracks, because she can do them well, even if some of the tracks across this album aren't quite as good as some of the best moments. But I still prefer her to do a consistent album from start to finish that goes in this direction than something like, I don't know, Lover, where every track seems to go for completely something different, and some of them completely miss, some of them do hit, like it's just all over the place. But here, since Folklore, she's really tried to keep a really nice consistency across her albums, despite the fact that they are both hitting an hour in length, which is pretty damn long. Ivy is definitely one of the best instrumentals here. You've got the Sufjan Stevens type of instrumentation here, just lending itself really nicely to the chamber pop sphere, which I think she sells really well. I think more tracks should sound like this, to be honest, because I think she actually kills this one, to be honest, even if some of the lyrics are a bit, again, on the nose. The writing across this album isn't really at its best, to be fair. So if I am going to find things to praise, I'm gonna have to find the instrumentals to be praising. Covered in You, talking about Ivy, it's all stuff you've heard before, a bit cliche, but again, this track sounds really nice, so I can't complain a huge amount. The last, however many or so tracks aren't really that strong, to be honest. Cowboy Like Me has this country sound to it once again, really standard in the genre. There is really very little going on here that you haven't heard 100 times before if you've, you know, heard the genre of country music, which a lot of people don't really care about. But I'm not going to act like Taylor Swift is doing anything here that I haven't heard before, because she really isn't. And I think this is a good moment to point out the fact that, yes, if you aren't into some of these genres at a closer level, you probably will think that this Taylor Swift album is amazing. I know that might sound pretentious, but if you just hear me out for a second and realize that, yeah, you know, if you never listen to anything in the country genre, like you never listen to anything from like Courtney Marie Andrews, Jason Isbell, Laurie McKenna, all of those names that are pretty modern and pretty fantastic, then yeah, you're probably going to think this Taylor album is amazing. But when you've heard other artists do it better, it just makes tracks like this stand out in a pretty generic, derivative way. Closure is one of the most confusing tracks I think she's put out in quite a while, because this instrumental just does not work. I don't know what she's trying to go for here. Maybe they were like, let's try something a bit different with the percussion and the way it's kind of mixed in the track, and the vocals are like taking the lead in mixing or whatever, and then the instrumental kind of like is fading in and out. It just sounds so weird. It's a strange moment, honestly. Don't know what they were trying to do here. The production team really botched this track. It's such a shoddily put together track that just confuses me every time it comes on. And then Evermore has the same issue that Coney Island has, where it's just really, really nondescript, far too low key for me to attach myself to anything. One of the weakest performances, I think, on a vocal level from Taylor here, because I just can't pick her out of a lineup. Like, I don't know who's singing this song, because she just sounds so whatever. Like, she just sounds so empty. There's barely any emotion really coming through. Bon Iver, not really huge on that feature either. He goes more into his falsetto. Never been a huge fan of that falsetto to begin with. It's just a really, really underwhelming way to close out the album. And when you compare it to the last time that they collaborated, which gave us Exile, which is a pretty damn good song, it makes you kind of wonder what really went wrong here. And it's that idea of leftovers that I was talking about at the start of the review, which is making me think about this track here. Did they record 2 songs and then think Exile was a better one, so we're just going to go with that, and this was just like the leftover one? I don't know. It's hard to tell, but it's just really not an enjoyable way to end the album for me. So yeah, this album has a weird flow to it because it's such a mixed bag. You've got some great tracks, you've got some decent tracks, and then you've got so many tracks that are just so mediocre and underwhelming that from start to finish, I'm just not entirely sure how I feel on this album on the whole. It's weird to give it a score because it's just not very it's not very easy to score it. I mean, honestly, when I think of her best songs ever, I don't know if any of these tracks on here would be in that list. You know, I don't know if any track on this album would be considered one of her best songs ever. But with that being said, they're not bad songs either. They're just pretty good. I think what this album suffers from is just, I don't know, like when I think of the best albums in this style, like, you know, folk, country, indie folk, chamber pop, this album just doesn't even come close to some of the best ones. And the thing is that I like Taylor Swift, but because of her name, her huge name attached to this album, it's just going to make people think that what you're getting here is better than it actually is, because a lot of people that listen to Taylor Swift haven't listened to these genres deeper, honestly. You know, some of the best albums in this style, Adrienne Lenker from this year dropped a great album. Mountain Goats have plenty of great albums. Sufjan Stevens has plenty of great albums. First Aid Kit, like there's just so many artists that I'd go to first before I'd hear this. And again, I like her, I like Taylor, but I just don't think what she's providing here is original enough. It doesn't stand on its own enough for me to truly praise it and call it something great. So I guess a 5.5 out of 10 from me is what I'm going to go with. There are good tracks on this album though, don't get me wrong. There are definitely good tracks here, but overall, I think it ends up being pretty meh, to be honest. For every good track there's just one or two that I'd never listen to again, and that's just how I feel. But let me know your thoughts on Evermore in the comments. You might like this a lot more than I do. Thank you for watching this review. Don't get too mad in the comments. I mean, do whatever you want, but just don't get too mad. Yeah, don't get too mad. Do whatever you want, but just don't get too mad. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed what I had to say. Hopefully you understood the perspective that I'm offering here. Thank you for listening to my opinions. Do have a good day. Subscribe if you haven't already. Lots of great videos on the way. Lists are coming soon. Year-end lists. Have a good day. And goodbye. Goodbye.